Welcome everyone to today's Alum Zoom conversation. My name is Melissa Bostrom and I am the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School. And this series is co-sponsored with the Office of Postdoctoral Services. I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Julie Martin, who is Impact Tracking Program Delivery Manager at McKinsey Company. That is a mouthful of a title, Julie. And Julie received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Lafayette College and came to Duke for her master's and PhD in social psychology. While she was a graduate student, she completed a certificate in college teaching. She served as an intern at SRI, and she also served as an intern in the After graduation, she spent a little over 2 years in institutional research and assessment at Temple University before moving on to the nonprofit sector with a role as Learning Research Associate at YPO and then as Director of Research at PowerMyLearning. Most recently, she has moved into the private sector in her role as Impact Tracking Program Delivery Manager at McKinsey, a position that she started in September 2021. So in just 5 years, she has managed to build a career that spans academia, nonprofit, and the private sector. And we are delighted to welcome her back virtually to Duke today to share her experiences. So we'll get started today with the 5 career questions that we ask all our guests, and then we'll move on to address some of the questions that came in through registration. If at any point you want to pose a follow-up question in the conversation, feel free to do that in the chat, and we'll do our best to integrate those in as we move along. All right, so please join me in a warm round of virtual applause for Dr. Julie Martin. So to get us started, Julie, can you tell us about your background?
Sure, and thank you so much, Melissa, for that amazing intro. I feel like you described my background better than even I can. So I really appreciate that. But like Melissa said, I have my PhD in social psychology from Duke, and I've been out about 5 years. And in that time, it's true, worked first in higher education in an office of institutional research, and then went to more of the nonprofit sector. And now most recently, I'm actually in the private sector. So I can definitely, if people have questions about how those areas differ, I'm definitely happy to share my experiences. But basically my path has been that, I started in my PhD program thinking I wanted to be a professor, but then I realized that I really enjoyed my applied research that I was doing through my program a lot more than my basic experimental psychology experiments. So I just started seeking out as many opportunities as I could to do applied research while I was still in grad school. And there was so much available to me. Melissa talked about a few of the things. I was an administrative intern in the graduate school itself. I also worked, like she said, at the Social Science Research Institute with Jessica Sperling. She's great, and she's really open to having graduate students help her on program evaluation projects. Also, I worked with David Jamison Drake, who's the director of institutional research here at Duke. I just reached out to him because I wanted to learn more about institutional research, and we did a project together evaluating preparedness for STEM out of high school. So there was just so much that I was able to do here at Duke itself. Oh, hello. And other things too. Like I also looked outside of Duke. I went to Wake County Public School District. They have a great internship program where you can work in their Office of Data and Accountability. So I got to see what program evaluation actually looks like in a school district. And I think they still have that intern program and are also, constantly applying, hiring research analysts. So that's another, I'm happy to talk with people more about that. And I can share my email as well. So anything we don't get to here, people can follow up. But yeah, that's a little bit about my background. I basically just realized I liked applied research. And so I went more that direction after my PhD program. So yeah, I'll stop there.
That is a terrific overview and very quick for all that you've managed to pack into those years. So tell us a little bit more about how you got your current job at McKinsey, Julie.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is that for any job that you're applying for, the 2 things that have helped me the most I've found is 1, get a referral, and 2, tailor your resume exactly to the job description that you're seeing. So my current role, that's how I got it. I got a referral from someone I knew who worked at McKinsey. And what I'll say about McKinsey is a management consulting firm. And so if you want to go the traditional consultant route, that's a very structured hiring process that is not one you can get a referral for, but there's so many roles at any consulting firm that are not just the consultants, and those, at least at McKinsey, you can get referrals for. So that's how I got my, I submitted my resume to my contact at McKinsey, and I got contacted the next day for a phone interview. So that was really, I think, the key, because otherwise it could have easily been missed. And then I think that I just won them over pretty quickly because they looked at the resume and it was what they wanted. I was solving the problems that they needed solved. So that's how I got my current role. But I will say I wouldn't have gotten my current role. I think, it was also the experiences that I've had since I've graduated grad school, right? So I think just the experiences that I had directly prior allowed me to tailor that resume to be show my previous examples of experience. So there was that too. Like you're gonna go through a journey with your career, and you might not be able, like right now I'm really more of a management position, but when I came straight out of grad school, I started in a research analyst position, and got experiences through that, and then eventually got to manager level. So I wouldn't say personally I probably would have been qualified for the role I have now right out of grad school, but you gain experiences. And as you can see from my resume, I'm not afraid to seek out new opportunities. And what I'll say is I spent 2 years at Temple University in the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, and I really enjoyed it. But after 2 years, I realized, if I just think back, if I had stayed there's so many diverse experiences and opportunities and skills that I would never have gained that I did get to gain by going other places. So that's another thing when you're early in your career. To me, my advice is don't be afraid to see what else is out there as well after a certain point.
That is terrific advice. So tell us a little bit more about your current job. You mentioned you're in a manager role. So what's it like for you?
Yeah, so my role, I'll explain it a little bit. It's impact tracking manager for McKinsey Academy. And so McKinsey Academy is the capability building arm of McKinsey. So McKinsey is a management consulting firm. They consult clients on how to basically, run their businesses more effectively and efficiently. But sometimes that involves needing to, upskill workforces or, retrain workforces. So McKinsey Academy we have over 30 capability building programs that can be deployed at clients to help them in many different areas. So it could be operations, it could be leadership skills, it could be digital analytics transformations, it could be marketing and sales growth. So there's so many different capability building programs that we have, and my role is to evaluate the effectiveness of those capability building programs. So my role, impact tracking manager at McKinsey, is actually a new role because they realized they kind of needed somebody to oversee the strategy across all of these different capability building programs. So I've only been with McKinsey about 6 months, and what my typical day has looked like so far is obviously getting to meet all the different stakeholders. And that's something that as you move up in an organization or in your career, you'll start to move from doing the work, like the analytics projects, to working a lot more with just relationships and sort of building those strong trust-based relationships with stakeholders to get things accomplished, and setting the agenda for what the work is going to actually be. So that's what I've been doing in my first 6 months, is actually setting the vision for what we want impact assessment to look like at McKinsey Academy, and then identifying strategic priorities and work plans that'll help us get there to eventually to that future vision state that we want to be in for impact assessment for our capability building programs.
That sounds fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have talked a little bit about some of the things that you did while you were at Duke to prepare yourself for this career. Are there things that you would add, suggestions or advice that you would add for the graduate students and postdocs with us today on how they could prepare for a career in this field?
Yeah, definitely. So like I had shared, I think just getting as many experiences as you can while you're a grad student will really help you get that first job outside of graduate school. So I can share all the things that I did. I will also share that the connections are really important. So the way that I actually got my job at Temple University's Office of Institutional Research and Assessment was through a connection of David Jamison Drake, who's the director of institutional research here at Duke. So basically, he knew the director of institutional research at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and she knew the director of institutional research at Temple University. And so I had earlier gotten introduced to the director of institutional research at UPenn through David. And then when I saw the Temple posting, I reached out to her and said, can you forward my resume to the director at Temple to make sure she sees it? And I got a call, and I got an email to do a phone interview the next day after she sent that email. So again, it's similar to what happened to me at McKinsey. It was having a connection who could basically make sure my resume got seen. And so that's a really critical part of getting a job. But in terms of what I was able to actually put on the resume, that was where the experiences in grad school came in. So I would say just if you think you want to go into the applied research space, just get as many opportunities as you can to do that while you're still a grad student. And there's so many different avenues you can go down if you're in a social science research space. So you could do UX research. I actually did briefly work with Duke University has in their library sort of like a user experience department. I worked briefly with them, but you can also, there's so many internships now at tech companies for grad students to do UX as interns, and that can really help you get a foot in the door if you might want to work at that company after you graduate. So that's like Spotify, Google, I mean, any tech company, like they have these programs for grad students in UX. There's also the path of institutional research and assessment, obviously. So that was where I worked with David. But then there's also program evaluation as a very broad field, and that's what I would say I do now, right? And I think there's always going to be a demand for that. And so the Social Science Research Institute is just one example of where you can do that. But I think, Bass Connections, I don't know if you all are still doing that, but that's also a way you can get experience in applied program evaluation. And then another avenue even is market research, which I've seen some of my colleagues, my former, my grad student colleagues, go down that path. So there's, I think, figuring out, what's maybe the path that you want to do and just getting as much exposure to that as early as you can. Don't be afraid to ask to, like I just asked David Jamison Drake, I just asked Jessica Sperling, like, can I work with you? And often people will say yes. So I guess that's my advice.
That is terrific advice. I love those stories, and just asking, and I think starting out in the academy in particular, people are very, I think, willing to help students and work with students to meet their goals. Excellent. So you mentioned that you think people are always going to need to hire employees with your particular skill set. So can you speak a little more broadly about the employment outlook for your field and whether the pandemic has changed anything?
Yeah, so I don't think the pandemic has hurt. Basically, I feel like those of us who have those social science research skills and are able to do research to, evaluate the effectiveness of programming. Like, I just think that wherever there's an organization that's doing programming, they're going to have a need to evaluate the, whether or not it's effective. So I think that field is, I wouldn't see it diminishing. I would say learning and development, which is kind of like the corporate, it's like a corporate space that I'm kind of in now for the first time. I would say that I think some corporations shrunk their learning and development offices when they were really struggling in the pandemic. But I think that what happens in learning and development is often there aren't people in roles to actually evaluate the effectiveness of learning and development, so the leadership couldn't see the impacts of the learning and development. So I think that if they did hire people who could do program evaluation within those corporations, then they would see the value, and then they would have actually been less likely to downsize that department to begin with. So it's kind of like a cautionary tale. And if you don't evaluate program effectiveness, then you run the risk of leadership not seeing the importance of the learning and development department. But I'll say, just from my end, I'm in an organization that provides capability building to external clients. that has only, the need for that, like the demand for that has only skyrocketed, especially as there's this whole like great resignation. There's, corporations are thinking, how can we keep employees? And one avenue that they can take is to invest in their employees' learning. So there's been a lot of demand for capability building programs, I will say, for sure. And then on my end, like I'm trying right now actually to create research associate positions within McKinsey so that we can have more people helping evaluate the effectiveness of these capability building programs. So from our end, we're expanding. So I think it's the social science research skill set is always going to be in demand.
That is excellent news, especially for the folks who are on the call with us today. So I want to pause just a moment and remind folks who are joining us for the call today that you're welcome to post questions in the chat if you would like, or to come off mute and ask a question live during the session. And if there isn't somebody jumping in to take me up on that offer, I want to turn my attention now to the questions that came in through the registration. And one was, what was your job search timeline coming out of graduate school? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm trying to remember back, and I think I probably started around Christmas break looking into jobs. I think in my mind I was thinking I don't want to look at the beginning of the year because most jobs that are being like hired for aren't going to probably want to wait until the end of the year. So I think it probably was around Christmas break for me. I never tried to do the academic job market, so I don't know as much about that. But I think, like, I'll just tell you from my current role, it took 3 months from when I did the phone interview to when I actually got hired. So it can take a while. I found it just often does take a while to go through the whole hiring process. They have to interview lots of people, coordinate schedules. So, I think as far as actually searching on the, job boards and things like that, the earlier, the better, probably.
That's very helpful. There was also a question, and I don't know if you want to add anything to this. You've already mentioned a number of transferable skills you in graduate school, but are there any others that you want to surface that you feel like you use in your job every day now?
Yeah, so I will say that the biggest skill set is just the research design and analysis skill set that you get in graduate school. Like being able to say, okay, there's this question, well, these are the ways that we could answer it. I was shocked. Sometimes you take for granted what your skill set is, I suppose, but what I've experienced in my jobs is that I'm often the only person with a research background in my roles, and you really do have this ability to like design a study in a way that you're going to be able to answer the question that was actually asked. Whereas someone without a research design background, they might think they're doing research that's going to be able to answer the question and get to the end and figure out that they can't analyze it to actually answer the specific question that was that's important. So I think just the research design and analysis skill set for sure is the one that I've used in all of my roles. And then being able to communicate the results, data visualization skills, the more you can hone those, the more effective you'll be, I think, in any sort of role like this. And then just your ability to, write, narratives of complex research, distilling it into clear summaries. And PowerPoint skills also, they come up a lot, I will also say. So don't underestimate, like, PowerPoint. That's the way a lot of organizations communicate. So that as well. But Qualtrics, SPSS, I used those a lot when I first came out of grad school. And I think any statistical software skills and any survey software skills that you have are very marketable.
That is a wonderful answer. Thank you. For our next question, I'm going to ask you to go back in time a little bit and tell us a little bit more about your motivation to go into institutional research and assessment. What really brought your interest to that field as you were finishing up your time in graduate school?
Yeah, so I will say I was looking into, okay, where can I use my skill set? And like I said, I'd worked with David Jameson Drake in the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, and I thought that just might be a good fit because I knew I enjoyed, applied research, and I knew that I enjoyed being on a college campus as well. And so I just thought, this is one that is a possibility. It wasn't the only one that I was looking into when I was graduating Duke. I was also looking into lots of like program evaluation roles with nonprofits, but that was the one that I, got the furthest with. So it wasn't like it has to be institutional research and assessment, but I knew that was a good fit with my passion for applied research. And it was nice to be on a college campus. I have to say there were some nice things about that, especially when you were transitioning out of Duke and going into this like real world working environment. It was a little bit, it softened the blow a little bit of that change to still be on a college campus. So yeah.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about that transition from being a graduate student to being a professional?
Yes, it definitely, I will tell you, I was kind of shocked by like just it's kind of like your identity is almost shifting a little bit, because when you're in graduate school, everyone around you is just like focused on the pursuit of new knowledge, and it's and thinking about theories, that's the currency. And then when you get into the real world, like working world, your tasks are more assigned to you. You're in an environment where you need to now produce for like larger goals that you're not necessarily setting. So it was just, that was kind of a shock to me, is that like people's mindsets are just so different than the mindset that you see among academics, because their goals are different. They're trying to just create new knowledge through innovative research. It's just a very different environment, and it almost is like your identity's shifting a little bit.
Yes, thank you. So one question that one of the attendees asked was, do you imagine that you're going to return to higher education at some point in your career? Where do you see your trajectory going, given that you have experience in academia, nonprofit, and the private sector?
Yeah, I would say I never rule anything out, but I don't think that I don't think I've been like setting myself up to do something where I could return to academia as like a professor. I really haven't even thought about it too much, though, to be honest. I think I could probably adjunct courses if I wanted to, or maybe one day I could be back in academia in that like higher education administration sort of area. But yeah, I don't, for myself personally, think that I would fit the professor track, right, like as based on what I'm doing right now. So I will say that, but I also didn't really want, I realized pretty early on I didn't want to be a professor. I just was really, I didn't love the like publish or perish mentality that you kind of are up against. And I also knew that I wanted to be in the Philadelphia area. That's where my family's from. And so I know you have to be a little more flexible with where you're living if you want to be, a professor, just because you got to go kind of where the jobs are.
That makes a lot of sense. So do you see yourself maybe staying in the private sector in the immediate future, or do you have some long-term plans that you feel comfortable sharing in this context?
Yeah, I think definitely the private sector works for me for now. I will say, like, the great thing about the private sector so far in my experience is that there are a lot of resources, like as far as it just like I worked in small nonprofits prior, and it's just obviously it's a much smaller environment. So if you need more research support, there might just not be the budget for it. Whereas in so far my experience has been in private sector, there's more resources. So I definitely think that this is where I'll be for a good amount of time. But as long as I'm doing applied research, I'm flexible. I think that's the main thing, is figuring out like what do you enjoy the most, and then try to find a job where you're able to do that. So that's how I've sort of guided my decisions for my career.
That's great advice. I want to note that we have time now for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If anyone would like to pose their questions in the chat, if they're not in a space where they can unmute themselves and ask them live, but we also welcome live questions from the audience at this point. Right, so we have a question in the chat. chat window arranged so I can read it. You mentioned some internships in graduate school. How did you communicate with your advisor about your internships, and what was your advisor's opinion?
I think I let my, so the way that my applied research actually started was it was just an applied research project that I partnered with the student affairs office in, and my advisor sort of knew about that and was very supportive of that because it was in line with my area of research. My area of research was belonging, and that was kind of what I was studying with the student affairs office. So she was very supportive of that. I have to be honest, I didn't share everything I was doing, and I don't know if that's the best practice or not, but I just, I did feel like, it felt like you are being sort of trained to be a academic, to be a professor. And so I probably could have been more transparent than I was, that I was pursuing these other things. I wasn't hiding it. And actually I did do a presentation at a brown bag on like my experience working at Wake County Public School District. So, I mean, I guess I was lucky that my advisor never like discouraged me from doing any of that kind of work. And I probably could have shared more with her, like that I was doing it. I sort of sought it out all independently, and maybe I could have asked her for more support in trying to find some of those opportunities than I did. But I think as grad students, sometimes we feel like, oh, it's maybe not what we're supposed to be doing. So I guess I got lucky about that. But I think even if your advisor pushes back, I just think you should try to find like others who might be supportive, who can help you still pursue that. And I think the graduate school does a great job of that. Like they realize that not everyone's going to go that professor route, and I think that they're a real resource.
Thank you for that endorsement. I see Eric has a hand up. Eric, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here to speak with us. I have a question about the differences in terms of work-life balance between different sectors, private, nonprofit, and higher education, non-professor track. And in particular, you're currently at McKinsey, and whether you know if there's a difference between kind of the consultant lifestyle and work-life balance and your position.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I will say is that I naively thought that getting out of academia would get me into a place where there would be good work-life balance. And that I will say that was naive. I think any industry you go to, there could like work-life balance is a challenge across like work life in the United States. So you really have to set the boundaries for yourself. I will say, yeah, so all the places that I've worked, I would say that the one that had the best work-life balance was probably Temple University. Like people really didn't like send emails after 5 and things like that, but part of that was that we were required to be in the office 8:30 to 5 at that time. I don't know how things have happened since the pandemic. So I think that work-life balance can become more challenging when the organization is remote and it's global and people are emailing at all different times. And then your question about consulting versus not, I think that in general, work-life balance is better when you're not a consultant. I have never been a consultant, so I can't fully speak to it, but just from what I've heard, it is a little better than when you are a consultant, but still very challenging. It's like you have to set the boundaries for yourself, and you have to say no to certain work that you're asked to, you have to gain that skill set, otherwise you will burn out. So not the most happy answer, I guess, but just an honest one that yeah, but I will say I think my work-life balance is okay in my current role at McKinsey, but it is something that I have to actively work for, because I could answer emails all night if I let myself.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, we have reached our time today with Dr. Julie Martin, and please join me in a warm round of applause for her for sharing her really unique expertise sets and experiences. And I see that she is sharing her email address in the chat for anyone who wants to follow up with her. Thank you so much for that, Julie. Thank you all for coming today. You want to say one last thing, Julie?
Yeah, just thank you all so much for taking the time. And like I said, I'm happy to talk with you all if you have individual questions. I know it's just 30 minutes. So I really hope I can be a resource because I know what it was like when you're trying to pursue your career after graduate school. So definitely, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about my path or anything at McKinsey as well.
Thanks so much for coming today, everyone. Take good care.
Thank you.